You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. And today we're going to try to rise to the moment and talk about hurricanes. Because, of course, Florida has been hit, not just Florida, but the whole southeast of the United States has been hit with not one, but two really climactic, dramatic, historic storms. So we'll talk about that. And then our guest for the conversation is Susan Hawthorne, who is a remarkable literary combination. She is a poet. She is a translator. She is a prose writer. She's a feminist theorist. She gives speeches. She is many, many things, and they're all quite impressive. So we'll talk about her latest book, which is just out now. And then we have Fighting Words at the end of the program, which is about reality. And what in hell is that anyway? Anyway, it means we better get started right now with climate change and go beside and into and behind those headlines. The World Health Organization calls climate change the greatest public health threat we face on the planet. Yet the two issues that most directly rise to this acute level of gravity are hardly mentioned in the current presidential campaign: climate change, which threatens the planet itself, and artificial intelligence, which, unregulated, threatens humanity. Let's take them on one at a time as we go. In the wake of catastrophic Storm Helene, but even before the full estimates of need, damage, and death have been calculated, it turns out that there was yet another cataclysmic tropical storm, Milton, brewing off the Gulf of New Mexico. As I just wrote those words, Milton's status was upped to Category 4 and then 5, with special warnings that its storm surge may well grow to be far, far greater than was Helene's, which was very high. Storms of such massive severity coming so close together are unheard of, yet more are brewing in the Gulf and beyond in the Atlantic, which could spell cumulative crises for the entire southeast of the United States. It is currently ricocheting between Category 4 and Category 5. That's Milton, that is. And some reporters have said that it would go to Category 6 if there were such a thing. Oh, and by the way, tornadoes and twisters have already been seen, beginning along the coast of Florida as well as inland. Newscasters, following on the Biden administration's leadership, have finally begun to name such disasters accurately for what they are: human-caused climate change. Yet this issue, which ought to unite humanity in the struggle for the preservation of our planet, is still being minimized, denied, or lied about by the right, especially Donald Trump, whose deliberate mis- and disinformation messages are costing people's lives. The culprit? Fossil fuels. Their use, which is worldwide and declining at no comforting speed yet, is responsible for warming the entire planet, in this case, notably, the oceans, which in turn breeds hurricanes, typhoons, tsunamis, and twisters. Burning fossil fuels is primarily what's driving the climate crisis, which not only threatens the health of billions of people worldwide, and not just because of the toxic chemicals involved or because of extreme weather events, but also because of new viruses being released as ecosystems are being destroyed and animal viruses are being transmitted to humans, as was the case with COVID, and because of the disease-carrying vectors like mosquitoes, ticks, etc., that are migrating to new, unsuspecting regions due to warming weather. Newsflash, our healthcare system is so not prepared for what is coming. As cancer spreads and the climate crisis worsens, more people are looking to the healthcare community to move from solely researching and treating chronic illnesses like cancer, asthma, diabetes, and stroke, to addressing prevention by leading our society in kicking our addiction to fossil fuels and toxic chemicals. In addition to cancer, by the way, the chemicals in the air that our communities are breathing are also linked to learning disabilities, birth defects, asthma, immune dysfunction, Parkinson's disease, endometriosis, and neurological decline. The National Cancer Institute estimates the cost of this toxic pollution, well, let's say in 2020, alone to be more than $160 billion. $160 billion. Cancer has become a major pink ribbon industry, but over the years, the healthcare system seems to have gone from trying to prevent cancer to trying to accustom us to living with it. So why have the big four healthcare pension funds in the U.S., the Mayo Clinic, Kaiser Permanente, HCA Healthcare, and Ascension Health, invested more than $4.5 billion in fossil fuel companies? The U.S. healthcare system is itself responsible for almost 9% of the country's greenhouse gas emissions. This is roughly the equivalent of the annual emissions of over 125 coal-fired power plants, and it's because of the system's reliance on fossil fuels to run their facilities and their equipment. Healthcare is 18% of the entire U.S. economy. Just think of the impact we could have if we were committed to such renovations as supporting local sustainable development, reducing single-use plastics, eliminating dangerous anesthetic gases. There are safe alternatives. Buying more local and sustainable food for hospital patients and for employees, electrifying the fleets, moving to more telemedicine, and wasting less drugs and other supplies to protect vulnerable communities from fossil fuel poisoning. How about starting to run hospitals on renewable energy? Buy food and supplies from local sources to reduce carbon from transportation emissions they use to get themselves and their patients to and from the hospitals. But here's some good news. The health community, which is led usually by women, its nurses, mostly women, that community has made big changes before. When they learned that medical waste incinerators were the largest source of cancer-causing dioxin emissions in the U.S., more than 4,500 incinerators were closed, and hospitals learned how to reduce their waste, reuse and recycle what they could, and use safer waste treatment technologies to deal with infectious waste. And when it was proven that smoking caused cancer, the healthcare industry developed programs to help us quit and helped persuade young people not to start to smoke. They also banned smoking from hospitals. Do you remember when that was still permitted? My God. When the system learned that broken mercury thermometers were contributing to dangerous mercury levels in water and fish, and ultimately into our bodies, the health sector phased out mercury thermometers and found safer alternatives, not only in our country, but all around the world. Already over 1,000 U.S. hospitals that have committed to net zero emissions, and thousands more around the world are on the same path. Over 60 governments have committed to design low-carbon and climate-resilient health systems, including our own government. Look, we had best start planning yesterday One way or the other, we need to mobilize ourselves and each other toward these two gargantuan problems and solving them. One way or the other, we know that our opposition will continue to deny and deflect reason. More to come on this, lots more, and in future programs, and also on AI. We have to take a brief pause here, but then I will return with our guest for the conversation, Susan Hawthorne. Subscribe to this program on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. Follow us on Twitter at WMC Live, like our Facebook page at facebook.com/WMC Live, and visit us at WMCLive.com for more information about our show and our guests.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Susan Hawthorne is an award-winning writer of poetry, fiction, and nonfiction. She is the author or editor of 29 books published in 7 languages across 22 territories. Very impressive. Too many to list here, although I will say that her latest book, proudly and openly, simply called Lesbian, is a collection of her essays, and we're going to talk about it here. That's the newest nonfiction book. And her latest poetry collection is Cow, which was shortlisted for a number of major prizes. She has translated literary works from Sanskrit, Greek, and Latin, and her books have been translated into German, Spanish, Arabic, French, Czech, Tamil, and Portuguese. She's been active in the women's liberation movement since 1973, and she was an aerialist in 2 women's circuses. It just goes on and on. She has taught English. She's an adjunct professor in the School of Humanities at James Cook University, and she is the co-founder in March 1991 with Renata Klein of the feminist press, the independent feminist press, Spinifex in Australia and worldwide. So, with no more delay and no more time spent talking about who she is instead of what she is and what she writes, here is Susan Hawthorne. Susan Hawthorne, my dear, welcome back to Women's Media Center Live.
Thank you, Robin.
Well, I have to tell you, I am more than deeply impressed by this tome that you have written, which is called Lesbian, but it is spelled in a beautiful design cover. God, it's gorgeous. My compliments to the designer. Because it uses the typefaces of the dictionaries use for pronunciation. So at first it may be a split second hard to decipher, and then you get it immediately. It is not so mysterious that it impedes reading it, however. And its subtitle is Politics, Culture, Existence itself. And it is, if there were a compendium of, say, A Sisterhood is Powerful, of lesbian existence, this would be it. Except that it's all done by one small woman, Susan Hawthorne. And congratulations, Susan. This is just brilliant. It's really very fine.
Well, thank you very much, Robin. And, Sisterhood is Powerful was one of the first books I ever read. Not quite the first, but certainly very important to me and very early in my feminist growing up. So I'm really delighted that you like the book. Great pleasure.
You think? This is 5 decades of Susan's writing on feminism, lesbianism, women, patriarchy, overthrowing it, patriarchy that is, and everything else, plus very, very abstruse and yet accessible forays into where my notes are like a crazy lady's, and everything from Christine de Pizan to Frantz Fanon, and you're just so damn smart too, and Monique Wittig figures prominently in the book, and I'm so pleased about that because I knew her before she died, and we only met once in New York in a terrible conference, Susan, that was supposedly a thing to honor de Beauvoir. This was shortly after de Beauvoir's death, and she was here for that, and unfortunately so was Hélène Cixous, and the rest of the postmodern French feminists who, you remember, tried to copyright the name the women's movement. And yeah, they were really special. And I went with Susan McHenry to attend it, just and be in the audience. But I was so upset and outraged by some of the things that were said, and just said with impunity, that I raised my little hand and I commented a few times. And Cixous tore into me like a furious hurricane. And to my absolute amazement, this French woman stood up and said, I am a Wittig, and I say, and she took the whole entire thing. And we only met briefly to talk, but I so loved her, and I loved her work too. So I'm very pleased that you have resurrected her in order to honor her, because she doesn't, as you point out, there were no proper obsequies given over her death.
Mm-hmm.
But
and I keep reading her again and again, and each time I read her, I get something new from her work. It's extraordinary.
You've driven me back to her now. I'm going to read her very soon because I realized how much I have forgotten. So, yeah, she was incredible and an impassioned voice. It was a great voice, But you, my dear, by saying that it's abstruse, I do not want to frighten readers off, because it's not impenetrable, and it is not. It manages in the most simple and obvious way to be very accessible without talking down to a reader, and to bring the reader right up to the level of intellect that the book is coming from. And the explanations are so cogent and so witty at times that you laugh out loud. There's one about the differences between the words sex and gender, which is hilarious and true. There's one about is an observation that you have when you're writing about sadomasochism, and you talk about how strange it is that with all of these expensive toys, the more you get into it, apparently, the more you buy of whips and chains and all sorts of God knows what things. And that it's always struck you as really rather peculiar, that although you don't mean everyone, God knows, you certainly don't mean all socialist feminists, but you do mean that there are a number of socialist feminist women who are strongly into S&M. And yet it's a very capitalist, toy, as it were. It's just very funny. And there are lots of moments like that. You take on intersectionality, although you're a little bit more friendly to it, but you take it on in a way that is sideswiping postmodern thinking. And I love you for that, Susan Hawthorne. I'm so glad. I'm so grateful.
Thank you for that. I think the thing about intersectionality is it's a very come lately kind of idea, because feminists had been doing it for decades.
Yeah.
And that's also shown in some of the pieces I write, even the relatively early ones.
Yeah.
And the piece I write about exoticization, and how exoticization becomes within, say, the arts industry, becomes a method of marketing.
That's right.
But it's actually very empty and very appropriative of the artists, the writers, the musicians, etc., who are being exoticized.
Oh, yeah.
So, I think intersectionality there was nothing particularly new about it. Good idea, but very limited in many ways.
Well, you're not the first to think that, because Kim Crenshaw, who was part of the small group of Black intellectuals who came up with it, agrees and says, it's not that this didn't exist before. I gave a name to it, and people cottoned to the name. Although, God, it is unforgivable what they have done with that name and the sins they have committed.
And they've now turned it into a kind of corporate word that says, "Oh, look how intersectional we are being, or how diverse we are being." Well, radical feminists and lesbians have been doing it for decades.
Yep. It's extraordinary. And oh God, there's just so much. There's the whole exegesis that you get into on how words like gender and queer, for that matter, and intersectionality all disappear. Words like lesbian, words like feminist, the actual name of things, and muddy it and drown it so that it can't stand on its own. I am,
and that's why I called the book Lesbian.
Yeah,
because in order to talk about it, people have to say the word. And as I say, I think in one of my articles about lesbian human rights, one of the ways to make lesbians' lives better is to actually use the word lesbian, and use it as often as you can in as many contexts as you can, so that the word lesbian comes back into the vocabulary of English speakers, or elsewhere as well, other languages as well.
Because it's not there now. It's not, it has been smothered and strangled and hidden and hushed and shushed and it must be there. But what is fantastic is this, the breadth of the book is remarkable. It's all the way from prehistory to right up to aeration, because you were an aerialist with a women's circus, and that whole section of the book is fascinating. What you do with disability, what you do with trans people, and the trans controversy that took place over the women's circus, the former women's circus in Australia.
It does still exist, and these days they have an asterisk in their name, which in Europe is used as an indicator of we are a pro-trans organisation. So, the whole thing has changed, and I had to leave because I simply could not. I stopped trusting people. I stopped trusting other women, and circus is a place where trust is actually really, really central. And in my later piece, The Aerial Lesbian Body, which I wrote about the performing older women's circus, I go into the whole issue of trust and the ways in which the over 40 women, that is aged over 40, developed a lot of things that actually we couldn't have done in the women's circus, because we had a different group of women and a different experience of over 40s. So it was extraordinary, really.
Are you still in the older women's circus now?
No, I'm not. Partly because I live 3,000 kilometres away.
Oh, dear. I was so agog that you were in any circus at all, Susan, because, physical, how shall we say, sports, exercise, arts are not my major métier. When I was younger, I did dance, and I took class, and I was not bad. But it went the way of all flesh, and it is not part of my vocabulary now.
I grew up on a farm where where we hung off the farming equipment, we hung out of the trees, we did all of that. So I resumed doing that at the age of 42, and all I really wanted to do was aerials, was my main interest, and I did do other things, but that was the thing that I was really passionate about, and I think that comes out of my childhood experiences.
Of hanging by your knees from trees.
Yep, and dropping into the fleeces, the wool fleeces. Although we weren't allowed to drop into the fleeces because they were to be sold. We had to drop into what's called the daggy bits, which are the end fleeces.
I know what those are. I know. I've been at a
Good lanolin for the skin.
Well, was it Renata Klein who convinced you to do this book? I mean, who got on got on you and sat on your head until you did it? Because it is a real work of something. I mean, it's not just something.
I was getting together a list of things that I had written about lesbians, and so I went through my CV and just looked for the word lesbian. And I came up with 60 articles I'd written. I thought, interesting. And then I said that to Renata, like articles with lesbian in the title. I said that to Renata, and she said, well, maybe it's time for you to put together a book.
Yeah.
And I knew I thought that was in some ways crazy, but also a good idea. But then I had to go through and I had to decide. The 60 is way too many. You can't do 60 articles in one book unless you're doing an encyclopedia. But I knew it was too many, and then I had to choose. I also wanted to choose some that didn't have the word lesbian in the title, but the content of which was about lesbians. So then I started pulling it together and choosing and cutting and trying to make sure I didn't have overlaps and so forth. So, and I put it together in almost all chronologically because I wanted to show that, for me, politics and culture always went hand in hand.
That's right.
That they were not separate. That I was involved in political campaigns, but I was also involved in arts and creation and poetry and writing about these things and the importance of culture for lesbians and the importance of lesbian culture. So those two themes of politics and culture interweave throughout the book, and that's intentional. That an essay about poetry is followed by a book about an essay about a critique of S&M.
Absolutely,
so,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, because they're not separate. I mean, they are of a piece, and the thinking behind them is of a piece, and so it's very proper that they are of a piece in the book. I just want to read some of them, some of the titles, so that people get some taste of the span, of the breadth of the book. Okay, it starts with a couple of terrific acknowledgments, an introduction, and a poem, because of course you're a poet, and Friends at the Wrong Time, and then the institution of heterosexuality and lesbian feminism as a strategy. Then the politics of the exotic, the paradox of cultural voyeurism, and then what do lesbians want? And then Planting Roses, an exploration of lesbian traditions, cyberculture, and poetics. And then Transgender people in the women's circus, open letters. And From the Lesbian Body to the Same-Sex Attracted. And the depoliticizing of lesbian culture. That's a dynamite piece. And the political uses of obscurantism, gender mainstreaming and intersectionality, the butterfly effect, the disruptiveness of lesbian knowledge. And then it just goes on. I mean, ancient hatred and its contemporary manifestation, and the torture of lesbians, and how to count the unrecorded and the unremembered, in Sappho's words, and unnoticed lesbian refugees and lesbian economics. And the silences between. Are lesbians irrelevant? And the aerial lesbian body, the politics of physical expression, footnoted and sidelined the campaign for lesbian human rights. It goes back and forth between what is really a wonderfully wild, and I mean that in the truest sense of it, an unfettered imagination, laying out possibilities and spinning in them, as Mary Daly would have said, between that and basics like the politics of the campaign for lesbian human rights, so that people get both the one inside the other, and on lesbian language and on fragmented feminisms and oh my God, it goes separatism, the lesbian art of Suzanne Bellamy. It is a real treasure, and I do congratulate you on it. I mean, it goes from, what is its opening date? Is fairly early on, 1975. Wow.
1975 is when I wrote the poem where I refer to your poem, Lesbian poem, in Monster. And this was published in a tiny, tiny little chapbook, and I actually stumbled across it last year when I was putting it all together and thought, that might make a good opening poem for the book.
Oh, my God.
And so, and that I think that was the first poem I'd ever read that used the word lesbian or was about lesbians.
Yeah.
So, you're all through this book, Robin. But
Well,
the other thing I wanted to talk about is, the very long essay I wrote on the torture of lesbians.
oh,
And
God, it's hard to read.
It's really hard to read, and it's, even though I wrote it, it's still hard to read.
Of course.
But it's such a critical thing, and I discovered that lesbians were being tortured when I was in Uganda, and a woman came up to me after I'd asked a question in a session about lesbians, and she said to me, be very careful, because in this country, that is Uganda, lesbians are tortured. And I was a bit speechless, but in the back of my head, I thought, I have to read up on this. I have to look at this. And so I spent a very long time looking into what was happening with lesbians and writing about it and discovering the awful situation of so many women. And also the other thing is the whole process of corrective rape and how that gets carried out against lesbians, not just in state torture situations, but also in the broader community. And the justification for raping a lesbian under the name of corrective rape is to turn lesbians into heterosexuals, which is just, for me, unthinkable. And yet it's so common, and my friend Consuelo Rivera Fuentes, who was captured in Chile and put in jail and tortured, she also talks about that, as do a number of other lesbians in different places. So it is something that needs to be taken into account.
And of course,
and recognised.
Amnesty International and the major groups don't do anything about this, of course. I mean,
I think they think it won't do them any good. They won't be able to raise money if they use the word lesbian.
Yeah.
And then on the other side, my last piece is about my friend Suzanne Bellamy and her art and her writing and her life, because she died a couple of years ago. And again, her work is barely known outside the lesbian community. And yes, it is the most extraordinary work. It is. We all have, many lesbians in Australia have one or two pieces by her that she made during her lifetime. It's almost like an underground.
I don't think I've ever seen her work. I can't believe.
Well, her work is on the cover.
Oh, that is her work.
They're her figures.
Yeah.
Well, her figures. She did all these extraordinary sculptures of figures that are kind of, could be from prehistory or could be from now or could be.
A lot of them Mesoamerican.
Really
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
But they're
yeah,
gorgeous. Oh,
yeah,
oh,
they are.
wow. Well, you've just you have now cornered the market on epic poetry and on well, I don't know what epic history now. This is because this no, I'm really blown away by it. It's very very fine work, and I hope I hope that women really pay attention. I don't want to sound like a school marm, or maybe I don't care anymore. But it deserves real rigorous reaction and real rigorous thinking. It is not simple and it's not easy. And you are so fucking fair. You're very fair. You really are, Susan. No, I mean, you're fair to even trans people when you have problems, clearly, with the trans movement. You're clear even with men. You're clear. I mean, this is a book about lesbians and lesbian culture and ethics and reality and attempt to exist. But you're so bloody fair that one can't help but be won over, I think. Maybe I'm being, well, I wouldn't say sentimental, but I mean, maybe I'm being biased or something, but I don't think so. I really don't. I think you've done a
I mean,
remarkable
for
job.
lesbians, the trans movement became very obvious to us in the 1980s. So there was nothing new about it. It's
Yeah.
just that it has been corporatized and weaponized and used to shut down lesbians. And in Australia, we have a case at the moment about a group called the Lesbian Action Group, who wanted to have a lesbian-only event at the Pride Centre in Victoria, which is a government-funded huge building, must have cost millions to build.
Mm-hmm.
But they will not let the Lesbian Action Group have an event there that is restricted to lesbians.
It's amazing.
Because otherwise, if you don't allow trans who are still intact, then you are being transphobic and you are being discriminatory. And yet this entire building is there filled with all sorts of A, B, C, D, E, F, G types. And they have all sorts of events, but none for lesbians if they're for lesbians alone.
Well, this ought to get the blood running in the lesbian community. I mean, if there's any justice on the planet, this book ought to do it, because it lays out the past, it explains the present, and it forecasts in a positive way plans for the future. And that's
And I hope that heterosexual women will also read it so that they get some sort of insight into lesbian culture and lesbian existence.
Yes, I hope so. I think that they will, because you are always reaching out to them. I mean, and it's a very welcoming book in a sense. It doesn't, it's not like reading Jill Johnson. I mean, it's with all due respect, it isn't one of the or how shall I say Solanas. That's not it. And people mistake Solanas anyway. She was
Yep.
she was a bit crazy, and so this the tone is a welcoming tone, and it's do you value yourself? Are you interested in yourself? Do you want to really change patriarchy? Well, read a few lines. Let's see what you think. And I don't see that people will not be very moved by parts of it, and deeply affected with rage and with fury by other parts of it. So you're now off to Europe.
Robin,
what?
I am. Could I please read just 2 lines from the poem that ends the book?
Absolutely.
The poem is called Things a Lesbian Should Know, and it was published in 2019, though written some years earlier. It begins that the lesbian is as old as humanity and may be older. How to conjugate the verb to love in any tongue.
Yeah. In any tongue. It's very clear.
Mm-hmm.
You must be very proud. You should be. You should be extremely proud.
I am.
Good.
I am. I'm very pleased with how it's turned out.
All right. Well, darling, I know you're about to go off to Europe and far places. And I hope you have a good trip, and I hope you have some vacation while you're abroad.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope you celebrate the glorious publication of Lesbian Politics, Culture, Existence, which is, of course, from Spinifex Press in Australia. It's got a beautiful cover, and it's got a beautiful insides, too. So, bravissima, my dear friend, okay?
Thank you so much, Robin, for talking to me today. I really appreciate it.
It's time for our final break, but I will return in just a minute, and I'll have some fighting words when I do. The Women's Media Center, founded in 2005 by Jane Fonda, Gloria Steinem, and myself, is a progressive, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to make women visible and powerful in media. You can learn more about the WMC at womensmediacenter.com.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Just you and me. Those are fighting words. Once-in-a-century storms are battering the southeastern coasts of the United States. The anguished war between the Israeli government and Hamas, now expanded to Lebanon, the Houthi, and by proxies of Iran, seems ever escalating. It has become a regional war. Meanwhile, too, the 3-year-old war between Russia and Ukraine continues, flirting at times with turning into World War III. And a certifiable madman is running for the most powerful job in the world again, our presidency. We are almost numb from the irreality of our daily lives, by which I mean the kind of farce we go through in buying groceries, making phone calls, seeing friends for dinner, organizing a meeting, going to work, doing laundry, acting as if all this was normal. Oh, there are plenty of people who are quite prepared in their lunatic fashion to tell us insane non-facts that are no facts at all. Like, for example, Marjorie Taylor Greene's latest babble that the deep state of the government is controlling weather and creating hurricanes, particularly in Republican-run states. Then again, with that election looming for the most powerful job on the planet, I, for one, am trying not to become utterly hysterical. The idea, the crackpot notion, that poll after nutty poll shows voters largely split, actually split, between voting for Kamala Harris and Donald J. something is itself a stunner. Can the women's vote save us? Can the black women's vote save us? Can anything save us? Never has the gender gap been so pronounced as in this election, with white males, young and old, constituting themselves as the problem. I obviously do not mean all white males. But I remember going out into the street to peer down 7th Avenue South on that fateful September 11th, watching the implosions on those 2 skyscrapers. And some guy standing next to me said incredulously, "Geez, it's just like in the movies." I think that was his only way of making it understandable, It had to become unreal in order to become real. But more and more we are living life as if it were a fiction, and not a very good one either. We don't need AI to push us over the brink. It's a fiction like a horror story or a murder mystery or a natural disaster flick. Not very good ones. Except for the gender gap. That's real. The gender gap is really real. So we must dream better dreams, invent more civilized fictions. We have to embody more kindness, humor, empathy, warmth, compassion, anger, strength. We must conceive of better selves and better realities. We have to imagine the gender gap as being so substantive that it is irrefutable. We must take that responsibility on our shoulders. We must carry ourselves through getting groceries, making phone calls, going to work, doing the laundry, as if we were each of us about to save the world. We don't have time for wailing. It's up to you and up to me to save the whole damn bloody world. We must act that way because we must make it understandable, because we must make it real, and because we will. And that's our show for this week. You can follow me on social media at The Robin Morgan. You can check out my blog at robinmorgan.net, and you can find my new novel, Parallax, and my just-out new book of poems, Harvesting Darkness, wherever books are sold. Portions of this program were taped earlier. Views expressed here do not necessarily represent the WMC. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. Executive producer, as well as founding and sustaining sponsor, Regina K. Scully. WMC president and co-executive producer for this program, Julie Burton. I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us. Join us next time on Women's Media Center Live.